Hello and welcome to Pockenrop. One of my favourite questions to ask people as I'm getting to know them is, what kind of music are you into? Or what's the first record you bought? It's a great icebreaker on a Zoom meeting. And in this video, which is part one of a two-part series, I'm going to be looking at 30 albums that I think had the most impact on my taste in music or shaped my musical journey. I'm going to kick off with a compilation from 1981, and it's Rock House. So this record I was interested in and chose to buy with my own money at the age of 7 because it had This Old House by Shakin' Stevens on it. But tucked away amongst the other 19 tracks on the album is Pretend by Alvin Stardust. There's a couple of Shawaddy Waddies. There's a couple of Stray Cats. There's 2 tracks by Rockpile. And a great song that it was a good 15 years later, I think, when I finally heard the album it came from, Without Love by Nick Lowe. And it kind of tapped into the kind of rockabilly revival that was going on in the late 70s and 80s. There are a couple of old rock tracks on here. So we've got Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival. And then there's Jungle Rock by Hank Mizzle, which is one of the best rock and roll songs. Even to this day, I love it. But it was a total flop when it was released. Gained an extra lease of life thanks to something like this on Rock House. Now, I used to own this and it got scratched and damaged. And I was delighted to pick up a copy for £1 from a car boot sale in Wales. When I started to get back into collecting vinyl again, because whilst this has probably had everything on here, the least impact in stuff that I listen to regularly, it's got a place in my heart because I kind of pretty much wore the record out, really. So my first choice, Rock House, the compilation. And my second choice is an album that I owned on cassette. I included in my top 15 of the 1980s. And it is the first album and band that I ever truly fell in love with. It's the debut from Bucks Fizz. I still love Bucks Fizz to this day. I have all of their albums in some format or other. And I listen to them often and it just catapults me back to childhood. I loved this album. And on my cassette copy, I literally wore it out. And I was distraught when it wouldn't play properly anymore. But I can still listen to it on CD and vinyl now if I want. I love this album. And it's not perfect. It's not great. It's not even art. But it's just pure pop. My second choice. For my third choice is a compilation album that I no longer own from 1982. And it is Complete Madness. So this was their first singles compilation. It introduced me to the band. It's got different versions of the singles to make it work in terms of the placings on the album. And every single all the way through from The Prince to the #1 hit single, House of Fun. I loved it. I think I probably wore that out. And I would love to find a copy again on vinyl and relive Complete Madness on vinyl. Great album. My fourth choice takes a big leap forward in time from 1982 to 1985. And again, we're talking stuff that I listened to on cassette. Now, I loved the fact that with cassettes, you had to listen to side 1 and side 2 because you couldn't just play it all over again unless you rewound it, and you were going to damage the cassette if you never listened to side 2. So I learned to love full albums because of cassette, and this one was Brothers in Arms. Amongst my top albums of all time, and the title track is amongst my top 15 songs of all time. Brothers in Arms is a great song, and its parent album is a phenomenon in the UK. Staying with the theme of things that I absolutely loved on cassette, from 1986, Hunting High and Low by a-ha. Another album where I know every word and note. I adored this album. And it's pop, but it's really sophisticated pop. So yes, of course you've got Take On Me. And you've got The Sun Always Shines on TV, which is a #1 single. But the album tracks are what really make this album shine. I love a-ha to this day. And I don't actually think this is their best album. For me, their best album is their most recent, which is Cast in Steel. And if you've never heard it, check it out. But Hunting High and Low is their best 80s album for sure. I really like it. Made me an a-ha fan for life. My sixth choice is quite possibly the most important album in this entire list. I borrowed this from Sutton Coldfield Music Library, and it was my first album by this artist. It is the Blue Album, the Beatles 67 to 70. This album changed my life. Now, yes, I know it's a compilation, but it was my entry point into the music of the Beatles. It was my discovery of what a incredible band, what incredible music they made. And as a compilation, this Blue Album is faultless. All of them contribute. It's not all just Lennon and McCartney songs. There's Harrison songs on here. There's a Ringo Starr song on here. It shows off who they were as a band. It shows off how inventive they were. There's stuff from Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, White Album, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. And it's a wonderful compilation. I can't stress how important this album was in my life, even though I wouldn't listen to it that often these days because I enjoy their whole albums, but it was my gateway drug into the Beatles. The most important thing that you're going to hear on this list. It also had a direct impact on my next choice, which is the second most important thing that you'll probably hear on this list for me. All the Best by Paul McCartney. So having become a Beatles fan in 86-87, at the end of 87, Paul McCartney released this double album compilation. It was TV advertised, and that is what I asked for Christmas in 87. And the Beatles are my favourite band. Paul McCartney is my favourite solo artist, and he's my favourite Beatle. And again, I can't stress the importance that this album had to me. It opened up his solo career in a way that I wasn't really expecting. And this is my original copy. I've owned this since I first got it Christmas Day 1987, because even when I wasn't playing vinyl, I couldn't bear to part with a record that meant so much to me. My seventh choice is All the Best. My eighth choice I do own on vinyl, but as part of a box set, and it is Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield. So one of my closest friends at school was quite instrumental in broadening my musical taste. And I would like to think, to a certain degree, I may have done similar back. And he introduced me to Tubular Bells. And as a result, I love Mike Oldfield. And I own many, many Mike Oldfield albums. I still love a Mike Oldfield album. And Tubular Bells was my entry point. My ninth choice is a band that, having heard a song by them and dismissed it, I was to be proven wrong. My ninth choice is the second album by Deacon Blue. It's When the World Knows Your Name. My entry to this was hearing Fergus Sings the Blues on the radio the same week that My Brave Face by Paul McCartney was released. And much as I love My Brave Face, I have to admit Fergus Sings the Blues was a more commercial song. And I had previously owned When Will You Make My Telephone Ring on single and dismissed it and didn't like it. Gave it to my sister. That all changed with Fergus Sings the Blues. Now, I was I had a savings account with, I think it was the National Provincial Building Society. And they used to do a thing where they gave you a voucher when you'd saved a certain amount to buy a half-price cassette single. Cassette single? And they gave you a voucher when you'd saved a certain amount to buy a half-price cassette album. And this album was one of those. I took a punt on it based on Fergus Sings the Blues, and a brand new favourite band was born in me. I love Deacon Blue to this day. I own all of their albums, with the one exception of the most recent, Riding on the Tide of Love, which I will own at some point soon. But this one is probably still my favourite. I absolutely adore every track on When the World Knows Your Name. They're also the band I've probably seen the most live during my life. I've seen them at least 4, if not 5 times. Love Deacon Blue. My 10th choice is related to my favourite artist, Paul McCartney. On his 1989 album, Flowers in the Dirt, he collaborated with Elvis Costello. And there are 4 tracks co-written on that album. And there are 2 tracks co-written on this album, and it's Spike by Elvis Costello. Now, I have to admit, I only was interested in a few of the tracks because they were co-writes or featured McCartney on bass. And I put it aside in my musical tastes until the re-release of his back catalogue, which I got the joy of going through in order of release, and it rekindled my interest. But I have to say that my starting point was Spike, and the track in particular, Veronica. My love for Elvis Costello developed a good 5 years later, but Spike was the start point. My next choice was another of those National Provincial Building Society cassettes. I have recently just got this for the first time on vinyl, although I have yet to spin it on the turntable. It's The Miracle by Queen, my first real Queen album. So, again, I had heard of the Queen songs. I'd always disliked I Want to Break Free, and therefore I had decided Queen were not for me. 1989, when The Miracle was released, I decided to take a punt with one of those vouchers and get The Miracle, and boy, was I delighted to have done so. As a result, I ended up going back to the record library in Sutton and borrowing as much Queen as I could to listen to. I own, just there, that Queen complete box that I bought probably about 6 months before the death of Freddie, I think. I absolutely love The Miracle. I think it's a lovely album. It's got problems, but it was my gateway to Queen. Now, I've used the phrase several times, gateway. And you're probably getting the impression that a lot of these albums are the first time I heard the artist. And this album led to a lifetime of fondness. Well, this is no exception. It's Iron Maiden's debut. Now, I vaguely remember hearing Infinite Dreams on Radio 1 in 1989. But I more soundly remember hearing the opening riff from Phantom of the Opera being used to advertise Lucozade with Daley Thompson. That riff, thinking, whoa, that was Iron Maiden? I never knew that. Caused me to get this out of the Sutton Record Library. And love this debut. In fact, I love Iron Maiden. I think they are an absolutely phenomenal band. I'm really looking forward to their recently announced new album, which is called Senjutsu. I've heard the lead-off track, Writing on the Wall, which is something else. It's very good indeed. But this is where it all started for me. Iron Maiden's debut. My 13th choice is an album that I think I borrowed on cassette from the library in about 1990, 1991, about the same time as I would have discovered Iron Maiden. And it's Singles 45s and Under by Squeeze. This sparked a lifelong love of Squeeze, who may be the band that I've seen the second most amount of time. It's got all of their hit singles up to 1982. And I already kind of thought I might like Squeeze as a result of hearing Labelled with Love on a compilation that my sister was given and was made for by a friend called Songs to Depress You, which also included Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks, which really is depressing. But Labelled with Love isn't that depressing, is it? It's a great compilation, and I love every song that's on it. And it led to me becoming a Squeeze fan. My 14th choice on the list is an album that my friend purchased, and I got a cassette copy of it from him. And I know they say that home taping was killing music, but home taping was sharing music. And it meant that we, on our small budgets, could listen to new stuff because it was The Road to Hell by Chris Rea. Now, this is again, gateway into the music of Chris Rea, an artist I very much enjoy and love listening to. It led to me getting even more Chris Rea. It's not my favourite Chris Rea album. I think that's probably Water Sign, but I would never have listened to Water Sign without having heard The Road to Hell. And finally, for this video, is a compilation from 1990, Changes Bowie. The same friend who introduced me to Tubular Bells, whom I used to debate Beatles, McCartney and Queen songs with, and who introduced me to Road to Hell, also introduced me to Changes Bowie. Now, I listened to it. I liked several songs. I disliked other songs. And I fell out of love with Bowie for a while. It took me a long time before I fully got into it. And now absolutely adore Bowie. But this was the starting point. This is the anchor with things like Changes and Ziggy Stardust and Ashes to Ashes that made me go back in the mid-noughties and start trying Bowie again, and then discovering that he was brilliant. It all started with Changes Bowie. So that concludes part 1 of this video. Please remember to like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Please come back to see what I talk about for the next 15. We're going to be getting older as we go. So I'll see you next time.